The Hall of Convergence lived up to its pretentious name with architecture designed to impress rather than function. Soaring ceilings, lighting that was either too dramatic or insufficient depending on location, and enough polished surfaces to give Sergeant Marcus Webb a headache from reflected glare. He'd been standing at parade rest outside Conference Room 7 for approximately 4 hours, which meant his feet hurt and his patience was depleted. Peace negotiations between humanity and the Kurith Empire had been stalled for 6 weeks. Marcus was part of the security detail, which meant his job was to stand quietly and look professionally competent, while people with actual authority argued about territorial boundaries and reparation frameworks. It was boring work punctuated by occasional moments of diplomatic tension that never quite escalated to actual crisis. During the current recess, he was stationed in a corridor filled with diplomats, advisors, and hangers-on who all seemed to think walking in circles while having urgent conversations made them look important. Marcus had perfected the art of professional invisibility, present but not intrusive, alert but not threatening. That's when he noticed her, a Kurith woman standing alone in an observation alcove, isolated despite the crowded corridor. She wore formal robes that marked her as high-ranking, intricate crystalline threading that caught the light in patterns that probably meant something to people who understood Kurith status symbols. But there was something about the way others avoided her, the careful distance other Kurith maintained, that suggested rejection rather than reverence. Marcus understood why after a moment. 3 deep scars ran across the left side of her face, disrupting the crystalline patterns that covered Kurith's skin. In their culture, physical perfection was prized to the point of obsession. Scars indicated failure in combat or dishonor so profound it required permanent marking. Either way, they were shameful. She caught him looking. Her crystalline patterns flared defensive red, anger, or embarrassment, hard to tell with Kurith emotional displays. Most people would have immediately looked away, pretended they hadn't been staring. Marcus just met her gaze with professional neutrality, because looking away now would be more insulting than acknowledging he'd noticed her. After a moment, she crossed the corridor toward him. Up close, the scars were precise, deliberate cuts rather than combat injuries, which suggested ceremonial marking rather than battlefield wounds. Her eyes were striking even by Kurith standards, silver with flecks that shifted color with the light. "You stare, human," she said. Her English was flawless but carried the musical accent characteristic of Kurith speech. "Do my scars offend your eyes as they do my people's?" Marcus, caught off guard by the direct confrontation, responded with characteristic bluntness. "No, ma'am. I was just thinking they make you look like you've actually fought in the wars we're here negotiating about. Which is more than most people in this building can claim." Her crystalline patterns shifted through colors he couldn't interpret, rapid changes that suggested strong emotional reaction. She studied him for a long moment, her silver eyes searching his face for something. Then she asked quietly, almost vulnerable, "Am I too ugly for you, human?" The question was so unexpected, delivered with such genuine concern, that Marcus's response was completely unfiltered. He laughed. Not cruel mockery, not nervous deflection, but genuine surprised laughter at the absurdity of the question. Because from his perspective, someone who'd seen 3 tour in conflict zones, who'd watched friends die in ways that left them unrecognizable, who treated burns and blast injuries and trauma that actually constituted disfigurement, 3 facial scars didn't even register as notable, much less ugly. "Ugly?" he said when he could speak again. His voice carried genuine confusion rather than mockery. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you've got 3 scars and perfect bone structure. I've seen soldiers missing limbs, burned beyond recognition, faces reconstructed with synthetic skin that never quite looks right. You're asking if 3 healed cuts make you ugly. That's the most ridiculous question I've heard all week. And I've been listening to diplomats argue about asteroid mining rights for 6 days straight." Her crystalline patterns flared brilliant gold, a color so vivid it seemed to glow from within. Every Karith in the corridor stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. Someone dropped a datapad that clattered on the polished floor with sound that seemed deafening in the sudden silence. The woman spoke rapidly in Karith, formal words that carried ceremonial weight even through the language barrier. Marcus had no idea what she was saying, but the reaction was immediate and dramatic. Every Karith within sight had gone completely still. Human security personnel looked confused and alarmed. They could tell something significant had happened, but couldn't identify what. A Karith advisor rushed over, speaking urgently in their language with tones suggesting either panic or profound concern. The woman responded calmly, never breaking eye contact with Marcus. Then she switched to English, her voice carrying authority that made the corridor seem smaller. "I am Princess Liara Kess, third in the Karith succession line, and you, soldier, have just triggered the bond of truth." Marcus's brain performed several operations simultaneously. Registered her title, cataloged that he'd apparently done something diplomatically significant, concluded this was going to be a problem, and maintained external composure because panic was unproductive. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I apologize if I've caused offense. That wasn't my intention." "You have caused no offense." Her crystalline patterns were still that brilliant gold. The question of mirror, when asked by royalty in formal setting, is answered either with calculated politeness or uncomfortable truth. Your response was neither. You laughed, genuine and unforced, because you found the question itself absurd. That constitutes pure response in our culture, truth delivered without political calculation. "I still don't understand what I've triggered, Your Highness." The bond of truth. When someone responds to royalty with unfiltered honesty, seeing us as we are rather than through layers of politics, they are considered bonded to us. You are now legally tied to me under Karith law unless you formally reject the bond. Marcus was pulled from his post within minutes and brought to an emergency briefing with Commander Hastings, whose expression suggested she was contemplating early retirement or possibly homicide. "Sergeant Webb," she said with forced calm, "tell me exactly what you said to Princess Liara Kess." Marcus recounted the conversation verbatim, including his laughter. Hastings closed her eyes briefly, possibly praying for patience or calculating how difficult it would be to discharge him dishonorably. "You laughed at a Karith princess. When she asked if her scars made her ugly, you laughed at her." "It was a ridiculous question, ma'am. She's objectively attractive. 3 scars don't change that." In Karith culture, that specific question has profound meaning when asked by royalty in formal setting. It's called the question of mirror, asking someone to reflect honest perception rather than political calculation. Your laughter, interpreted as genuine dismissal of her concern rather than polite deflection, combined with your explanation, constituted what they call pure response. Completely unfiltered truth. "I was being honest, ma'am." "I know. That's the problem. Your pure response has activated something called the bond of truth, ancient Karith tradition where someone who sees royalty honestly, without political distortion, is considered bonded to them. You're now legally connected to Princess Liara under their law, unless you formally reject the bond. Can I just apologize and explain it was a cultural misunderstanding? You can reject the bond, but rejection requires claiming your response was calculated performance rather than genuine reaction. You'd have to declare that you deliberately manipulated her for political purposes. Marcus processed this. "So my options are claim I'm a liar who manipulates people, or accept a bond I never intended with an alien princess I've known for approximately 5 minutes. Those are your options, yes. Both of those are terrible." "I'm aware." The briefing expanded to include diplomatic advisors, cultural specialists, and people from agencies Marcus didn't know existed. The consensus was clear. He needed to reject the bond immediately. Human Karith negotiations were already fragile. Having a security guard bonded to Kurith royalty created complications Earth's diplomatic corps wasn't equipped to handle. But linguistic experts explained the cost. Kurith placed extraordinary value on authentic emotional response. Claiming Marcus's honest laughter was calculated performance would validate their existing suspicion that humans habitually performed emotions rather than expressing them genuinely. It would undermine trust essential to successful negotiations. Marcus was granted permission to meet with Princess Liara in a neutral diplomatic chamber. She waited with minimal guard presence, her crystalline patterns currently displaying deep blue tones that suggested contemplation or concern. "Sergeant Webb," she said formally, "I owe you an apology. I should not have asked the question of mirror in that setting. I've created diplomatic complications neither of us intended. With respect, Your Highness, you asked a question. I answered honestly. I'm not sure either of us did anything wrong." Her crystalline patterns shifted briefly warmer. "You truly found the question ridiculous. My asking if scars made me ugly to you." "Yes, ma'am. You've got facial scars and perfect features. The scars are they're just scars. They don't define your appearance any more than my service ribbons define mine. You're striking. The scars are just there, part of the whole picture but not the defining element." She was quiet for a long moment. "That's why the bond activated. You saw me as a complete person rather than as scarred princess. That kind of unfiltered perception is extraordinarily rare in my culture, especially directed at royalty. Because everyone's too busy calculating political implications to respond honestly." "Exactly." She gestured for him to sit. "I should explain the bond of truth and why your response triggered it. In Kurith culture, royalty exists in isolation created by politics. Everyone who speaks to us is calculating advantage, managing perception, performing appropriate deference. Genuine perception, seeing us as actual people rather than political symbols, almost never happens. So you asked the question of mirror hoping for honest answer. Yes, I've been socially exiled for 3 years because of these scars. Everyone either pities me or is repulsed. Your laughter was so unexpected, so clearly genuine confusion at the question itself." She trailed off. "It was the first honest reflection I've received since I was marked." Marcus studied her. "How did you get the scars, if you don't mind me asking?" "I was commanding Kurith forces in a joint operation with human troops 3 years ago. Separatist attacks targeted a human colony. I was with the ground forces when they hit civilians, children specifically. I positioned myself between the children and explosive fragmentation. The blast scarred me, but the children survived." "So you got those protecting human kids?" "Yes, but in Kurith military culture, being scarred in combat indicates you failed to defend yourself adequately. I was marked as imperfect and dishonored despite the tactical success of the operation." "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You took hits to save civilians and your culture punished you for it." Her crystalline patterns flickered toward warmer tones. "Your reaction is remarkably consistent with your initial laughter. You genuinely don't understand why scars would be shameful. Because they're not shameful. They're evidence you were willing to take damage for something that mattered. That's the opposite of disgraceful. This is why the bond of truth activated. You perceive reality fundamentally differently than my culture does, and you express that difference without political calculation." She paused. "You can reject the bond, Sergeant. Rejection requires claiming your response was performance, which would reflect poorly on human diplomatic credibility. But I would understand if you chose that path. This was my error in asking the question in formal setting." Marcus had spent the last 2 hours receiving increasingly urgent pressure to reject the bond. But rejection meant claiming his honest reaction was calculated manipulation. He'd never been good at lying, and starting now seemed like poor life choice. "What if I don't reject it?" he asked. "What does accepting the bond actually mean?" "It means you're formally connected to my position in succession. You'd have certain legal rights under Karith law and responsibilities to understand our culture. It grants you standing to speak on matters affecting me, though not authority over me. It's complicated to explain in human terms. And politically, it either strengthens human-Karith cooperation by demonstrating genuine connection, or it becomes a weapon used against both of us by factions opposing integration. Her crystalline patterns displayed resigned blue. There are elements in both our governments who prefer continued conflict to cooperation. We'd become targets for them. Marcus thought about his options. Claim his honesty was performance and damage diplomatic trust, or accept unexpected bond and become political target. I'd like some time to consider, he said. Of course. You have 48 hours before formal response is required. But events accelerated faster than 48 hours. Marcus spent that evening researching Karith culture, the bond of truth, and Princess Liara's history. What he learned painted a picture far more complex than diplomatic briefings suggested. Liara had been rising star in Karith military, youngest commander in a century, tactical brilliance that had won critical engagements, genuinely respected by forces under her command. Then the joint operation with human forces, her decision to shield human civilians with her own body, the scars that resulted. Karith culture's response had been brutal. Immediate removal from command, social exile, constant reminders that she'd failed to maintain her own perfection. She'd been literally disfigured for saving lives, and her culture treated that as shameful weakness. The more he read, the more absurd her question of mirror seemed. Not because she was fishing for compliments, but because 3 years of isolation had genuinely made her question her own worth. She'd asked if the scars made her ugly because she'd been told they did, constantly, for 3 years. His laughter must have been profoundly shocking. Complete dismissal of the idea that scars mattered compared to everything else about her. No wonder it triggered ceremonial bonding. He'd given her first honest reflection in 3 years, and it fundamentally contradicted everything her culture had been telling her. Marcus made his decision before the 48 hours expired. He requested meeting with Princess Liara and informed her he was accepting the bond. "You're certain?" she asked. Her crystalline patterns were shifting through uncertain colors. "This will complicate your life significantly." "I'm certain." Claiming my honest reaction was performance would be lying. I don't lie well, and I'm not starting now for political convenience. You're accepting for ethical reasons, rather than because you want the bond. I'm accepting because rejecting would require claiming something false. Whether I want the bond is secondary to not lying about my motivations. Her crystalline patterns settled into warm gold. That reasoning is remarkably principled or remarkably stubborn. Definitely stubborn. It's one of my defining characteristics. So I'm learning. She pulled up formal documentation. Then we proceed with bond acceptance. Be prepared. There will be significant opposition from both our governments. She was right. The announcement of bond acceptance created immediate political chaos. Human diplomatic command was furious. Marcus had ignored direct guidance to reject. Karith court factions saw it as either scandalous embarrassment or useful political weapon, depending on their agenda. Then the threats began. Anonymous messages warning Marcus that bonding with scarred disgrace dishonored humanity. His quarters were searched without authorization, later explained as routine security inspection, despite never having happened before. Rumors spread that he was being manipulated, that the whole encounter was Stage D by Karith intelligence to compromise human personnel. Princess Liara faced worse. Her already marginal position in Karith society became actively hostile. Nobles who'd maintained distant politeness became openly antagonistic. Someone vandalized her diplomatic quarters with insults carved in Karith script. She received explicit threats promising violence for daring to bind a human to royal succession. The threats escalated when someone attempted to poison Marcus's food. The attempt was caught only because Karith metabolism processed certain compounds differently, and kitchen staff noticed the chemical signature during routine screening. Investigation revealed sophisticated military-grade toxin, lethal to humans in the administered dose. Marcus survived because someone else's biology flagged the poison before he consumed it. Pure luck. Princess Liara's response was immediate. She requested emergency meeting with both delegation security chiefs, presenting evidence that the poisoning attempt had used Karith military compounds, but required human intelligence about Marcus's dietary schedule and quarters location. "This is coordinated," she explained, her crystalline patterns displaying the dark red of controlled fury. "Someone with access to both Karith military resources and human security intelligence is targeting Sergeant Webb. That requires cooperation across our species." The investigation expanded. What they uncovered was more extensive than a simple assassination attempt. There was a network, Karith traditionalists and human supremacists working together despite publicly opposing each other. Their coordination was sophisticated. Shared intelligence, coordinated messaging, financial transactions that funded operations on both sides. The common thread was opposition to the peace negotiations. Both groups profited from continued border conflicts, Karith nobles from military contracts, human corporations from resource extraction in disputed territories. Peace threatened their revenue streams. Princess Liara and Marcus had become useful symbols. The scarred princess and the human guard, their bond representing exactly the kind of cross-species cooperation the conspiracy wanted to prevent. By attacking them, the conspirators could undermine negotiations, while claiming they were just responding to inappropriate cultural mixing. "They're using you," Marcus observed during one of their strategy sessions. Security had moved them to shared facilities where they could coordinate investigation while remaining protected. "Your scars, our bond, all of it is propaganda cover for opposing peace, because peace isn't profitable." "Yes." Liara's crystalline patterns shifted through frustrated colors. "I received these scars defending human children. Now humans and Karith are coordinating to use them against me. It's remarkably efficient propaganda. Paint me as shameful failure. Paint you as manipulated fool. Use our bond to argue cooperation is dangerous. We need to expose the coordination. Prove that opposition to our bond is just cover for opposing peace entirely. We'd need evidence linking the threat to the same elements sabotaging negotiations." They began investigating systematically, using Marcus's human contacts and Liara's access to Karith intelligence networks. What they found was damning. Financial transactions between Karith nobles and human corporate interests, communications coordinating opposition strategies, proof that attacks being attributed to border tension were actually orchestrated by conspirators trying to restart open conflict. The evidence painted a picture of conspiracy that transcended species. Powerful interests on both sides coordinating to maintain profitable warfare while publicly claiming to seek peace. "This is bigger than us," Liara said, reviewing the compiled evidence. "They're not just targeting our bond, they're actively sabotaging the entire peace process. Then we need to make this evidence impossible to ignore. But we don't have the authority or platform to present it. You're socially exiled, I'm just a security guard. We need to bring this to people who do have authority, and who we can trust aren't compromised." They approached the problem methodically, identified officials on both sides whose records suggested genuine commitment to peace rather than political performance, presented evidence in private briefings, building coalition of support before going public. The response was mixed. Some officials were genuinely shocked by the depth of conspiracy. Others were skeptical. The evidence seemed almost too comprehensive, too convenient. A few were clearly complicit, their reactions revealing they'd known or suspected coordination. But enough people recognized the evidence was credible that formal investigations were launched. Security protocols were reinforced. The peace negotiations continued, but with new awareness that internal sabotage was more dangerous than external threats. The conspirators recognized their exposure was imminent and accelerated their timeline. Intelligence intercepted communications, revealing plans for attack during the upcoming treaty signing ceremony. A devastating strike that would kill key negotiators from both sides and restart open warfare. The signing ceremony was scheduled for 3 days later. Security forces had 72 hours to identify and neutralize the threat while maintaining appearance of normal diplomatic proceedings. Marcus and Liara were brought into the security planning. Their investigation had provided the initial intelligence. Their insights into the conspiracy's methods were valuable for predicting attack vectors. They'll target maximum symbolic impact, Liara explained during tactical planning. Killing negotiators is strategic, but killing me, scarred princess bonded to human, that's symbolically powerful. It proves cooperation is dangerous. So your primary target, Marcus said. Likely, which means security around me should be used to identify the attempt. Commander Hastings, who'd transitioned from wanting to discharge Marcus to grudgingly respecting his investigative work, shook her head. We're not using you as bait, Your Highness. You're not using me, I'm volunteering. The conspiracy wants me dead specifically because of what I represent. Use that. The plan that emerged was risky. Liara would attend the signing ceremony with visible but not overwhelming security. Marcus would be assigned to her detail. His bond gave him legal standing to remain close, and both delegations recognized he'd proven trustworthy. Enhanced security would be concealed, waiting for attackers to reveal themselves. The signing ceremony began with all the formal pageantry both species could produce. The Hall of Convergence was packed with dignitaries, diplomats, military officers, and media, capturing every moment for constituencies across both empires. Marcus stood at Liara's side, wearing dress uniform and trying to look professionally competent rather than terrified. Liara's crystalline patterns were displaying the calm blue of focused composure, but he'd learned to read the subtle variations that indicated high stress beneath the surface. The speeches began, human and Kurith leaders taking turns announcing preliminary peace frameworks, celebrating cooperation, promising new era of partnership. The words sounded sincere. Marcus hoped enough of them actually were. 40 minutes into the ceremony, he noticed it. Kurith guards stationed at secondary positions, their movements too synchronized, their attention focused inward on the ceremony rather than outward on potential threats. Subtle wrongness in their positioning that suggested they weren't actually protecting the event. They were preparing to attack it. Marcus keyed his comm with the prearranged signal. Threat identified, Kurith security personnel, multiple positions. The response was immediate but subtle. Enhanced security began repositioning, cutting off exit routes, preparing to intercept. But the conspirators had planned for interference. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. Compromised Kurith guards moving to eliminate Liara, human operatives triggering prepositioned explosives, and external sniper fire targeting key negotiators. Marcus's combat training overrode conscious thought. He positioned himself between Liara and the nearest threat, engaged attackers with defensive maneuvers designed to buy time rather than win fights. He wasn't trying to defeat Kurith warriors. That would be impossible. He was trying to keep them off Liara long enough for actual security forces to respond. Liara fought alongside him with skill that reminded everyone watching why she'd held command rank despite her scars. She was devastatingly effective. Centuries-old Kurith martial arts combined with combat experience that exceeded most warriors. She fought with precision that eliminated threats while minimizing collateral damage. The fight lasted 90 seconds. Enhanced security neutralized the external threats while Marcus and Liara held defensive position against compromised guards. When loyal forces arrived, the conspirators were captured or killed. their plot exposed in the most public way possible. Marcus took a blade strike to his left arm during the fighting, deep cut that would require medical attention, but wasn't immediately life-threatening. Liara sustained minor injuries but nothing serious. They'd survived the coordinated assassination attempt that was supposed to kill them and collapse the peace process. The aftermath was chaos. Media captured everything. Both delegations scrambled to respond to the revelation that elements of their own security forces had been compromised. Investigations expanded to identify all conspirators. The evidence Marcus and Liara had compiled was made public. Financial transactions, communications logs, proof of coordination between supposed enemies who shared common interest in maintaining conflict. The conspiracy was exposed in ways that made denial impossible. Public reaction was swift. Both populations recognized they'd been manipulated by interests who profited from warfare. The conspirators had used cultural prejudices, Kareth about physical perfection, human about alien integration, to hide their actual agenda of maintaining profitable hostilities. The peace negotiations succeeded. Treaties were signed. The conspiracy's exposure actually strengthened cooperation by revealing shared vulnerability to internal sabotage. The formal recognition ceremony for the Bond of Truth occurred 3 weeks later, after Marcus's arm had healed and investigations had identified the full scope of conspiracy. Both governments acknowledged the bond as valid and honored. The ceremony was simpler than traditional Kareth royal proceedings. Liara explained this was deliberate. You triggered the bond through honest simplicity. We honor that by keeping recognition equally straightforward. When asked to speak, Marcus kept it direct. Princess Liara asked if her scars made her ugly. I laughed because the question was absurd. She's striking, intelligent, strategic, funny in ways that take me a moment to catch. The scars are just there, part of who she is but not the definition. They prove she was willing to take damage for something that mattered. That's not ugly, that's the opposite. If this bond helps prevent future conflicts by showing our peoples can form genuine connections, I'm honored to maintain it. But fundamentally, I just answered honestly when someone asked for honest perception. That shouldn't be revolutionary, but apparently it is. Liara spoke with quiet authority. Sergeant Webb's laughter was the first genuine reflection I'd received in 3 years. Everyone else either pitied my tragic disfigurement or was repulsed by shameful imperfection. He saw scars and concluded they didn't matter compared to everything else. That honesty triggered the bond of truth. His partnership helped expose threats to peace that both governments had missed because we were too focused on cultural differences to see shared vulnerabilities. I'm honored to maintain this bond with someone who sees clearly rather than through the distortion of politics. 6 months after the ceremony, Marcus had transitioned from security guard to liaison officer specializing in joint human-Kareth security cooperation. The work was challenging and occasionally dangerous, but meaningful in ways standing at parade rest had never been. His partnership with Princess Liara had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Not romantic in the traditional sense. They came from 2 fundamentally different backgrounds for that, but genuine affection and deep respect. They worked well together because the bond had been built on honesty rather than political calculation. Liara's social position had shifted dramatically. Her role exposing the conspiracy and her combat performance during the assassination attempt reminded Kareth society why she'd been rising star before her scarring. Public opinion was changing, slowly, but changing. Scars were beginning to be seen less as shameful marks and more as evidence of commitment to something beyond personal perfection. You know, Marcus said during one of their planning sessions, reviewing security protocols for an upcoming diplomatic summit, that question you asked that first day, do you still wonder about it? Liara's crystalline patterns shifted to warm gold. Sometimes, 3 years of isolation left psychological scars that don't heal as obviously as facial ones. For what it's worth, I still think it was ridiculous. You're striking. The scars just prove you were willing to put yourself between kids and explosions. That's admirable, not ugly. You're remarkably consistent in your perception. I'm remarkably stubborn about seeing what's actually there, rather than what people tell me I should see. That quality is both frustrating and valuable. I contain multitudes, mostly stubbornness and tactical competence, but technically multitudes. Her crystalline patterns flickered with amusement. We should review the security briefings. The summit is in 4 days. Right work, the exciting world of diplomatic protection. They returned to their planning, the comfortable partnership of people who'd been through fire together and come out stronger. Outside their offices, joint security forces patrolled formerly disputed territories. Cultural exchange programs introduced humans to Karith and vice versa. Peace was holding not because it was easy, but because enough people chose it over comfortable conflict. And it had started because one soldier laughed at the absurd idea that 3 scars could make someone ugly, and one princess was brave enough to ask a question that revealed truth. During the diplomatic summit 4 days later, Marcus stood at Liara's side in his dress uniform, scanning for threats while she engaged in diplomatic conversations with grace that came from genuine confidence rather than performance. Someone approached, a young Karith officer with ceremonial scars marking recent promotion. They spoke to Liara in their own language, gestured toward Marcus, asked something that made Liara's crystalline patterns flicker, briefly amused. What did they ask? Marcus said quietly after the officer had moved on. They wanted to know if the human who laughed at the question of mirror was as strange in private as in public stories. What did you tell them? That you're stranger, but also that your strangeness comes from seeing honestly rather than through cultural filters, and that sometimes honest perception is exactly what's needed to break through comfortable lies we tell ourselves. That's almost a compliment. But don't let it go to your head. Too late. I'm already composing my memoirs. How I accidentally bonded with alien royalty by laughing at a ridiculous question. That's a terrible title. It's accurate, though. Her crystalline patterns displayed warm gold. Accurate doesn't always make good literature.